Absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 2 o'clock. UK experts say a fourth COVID jab is not yet needed as boosters are 90% effective in people over 65 after 3 months. Meanwhile, a group of MPs, leading medics and scientists, is calling for a review of the jab's benefits for 12 to 15-year-olds. Conservative MP Miriam Cates, who coordinated this campaign, told GB News the benefit-to-risk ratio of child vaccination should be reassessed in the light of the Omicron variant.
Over recent weeks, with the Omicron variant becoming dominant and also with some new studies about the risks, I wonder if that balance has actually shifted. So it's possible now that vaccination doesn't really reduce the risk of transmission. Of course, it still provides excellent protection against severe disease. So it's brilliant for people who are at risk from COVID. But if it doesn't protect against transmission, that reduces the benefits of vaccinating children. And if we know a bit more about the potential harms, then we need to look at those too.
Court documents show Novak Djokovic, who's fighting deportation from Australia, tested positive for coronavirus last month. His lawyers claim he was granted a vaccine exemption to enter the country because of the recent infection. The tennis star has been detained at an immigration facility in Melbourne since Thursday morning after his visa was cancelled. Thousands of flat owners will not have to pay to remove dangerous cladding from their buildings. Housing Secretary Michael Gove says developers will have to cover the costs of the cladding changes for buildings over 11 metres tall. The bill's estimated to be up to £4 billion. Business commentator Michael Wilson says it's a relief for leaseholders.
For those people who have been trapped through no fault of their own, because, you know, people may well have bought flats. What do they know about cladding? Or rather, what did they know about cladding before Grenfell? Probably very little. Why should they know? It's down to safety organisations, of which there are plenty in this country, etc., etc. So I think it's relatively good news. How it will be applied, the detail of that to come.
The head of the UK's armed forces warns the rise in Russia's submarine activity threatens underwater cables crucial to global communications. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin says any attempt to damage the undersea cables, which transmit nearly all internet data traffic, could be considered an act of war. It comes after footage emerged of a collision between a Royal Navy warship and a Russian submarine in late 2020, sparking concerns about Russia's cable-macking activity. At least 56 people have been killed and 30 wounded after an airstrike in Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray. Aid workers say the bombing hit a camp for the internally displaced on Friday night. The government has previously denied targeting civilians in the 14-month conflict with rebellious Tigrayan forces. To the US now, 3 men have been given life for killing Omar Arbery. The 25-year-old's family were in the courtroom to hear the sentencing. The man was chased and gunned down in Georgia in 2020. His mother says she never lost faith that justice would be done.
When I entered the courtroom on October 18th, I sat in that courtroom for 5 weeks straight. But I knew that we would come out with a victory. Yes. I never doubted it. And I knew that today would come.
It's 4 minutes past 2. I'll be back with the latest news in an hour.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, they say a week is a long time in politics, and a year is a very long time indeed. But what might happen in 2022? Will Boris Johnson still be the Prime Minister at the end of it? To help us look forward, I'm delighted to be joined by the Independent's chief political commentator, John Rentoul. Hello, how are you this morning?
Hello, Esther. Happy New Year. I'm very well, thanks.
So, this time last year, lots was happening, but your predictions for this year coming, what do you see? What do you see happening, John?
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Yeah. Making predictions is a fool's game. So let's get to it then, shall we? Boris Johnson will stay Prime Minister. I think there's no doubt about that. I think he'll have a bit of a dead cat bounce recovery. I think he's dropped like a stone in the opinion polls over December. But I think he made the right decision on not imposing further coronavirus restrictions, just before Christmas. And I think he will gain a bit of credit for that, not least from people like you, Esther, who voted against him. And I think peace will break out in the Tory party for a bit, but then we are heading for a terrible situation in April when the taxes go up and energy prices go up, as you were mentioning there. So I think most of this coming year, Keir Starmer is going to be well ahead in the opinion polls, and you know what Tory MPs are like, Esther. They're going to start panicking.
Absolutely. I think because for a long time people haven't seen this sort of midterm drop in the opinion polls. That sort of seems to be from yesteryears. We're used to sort of seeing a steady lead or a steady opinion poll sort of readings, and I think maybe we're going back to a different era in politics. You remember those midterm, you could be sort of 18, 20 points behind.
Yes, well, and Ed Miliband, for example, was ahead in the opinion polls for a lot of that time when David Cameron was Prime Minister. Didn't do much good at the end, and I suspect that is going to be Keir Starmer's big problem. He has to really work hard to establish Labour's economic credibility over the coming year. I'm afraid calling for a cut in VAT on energy bills doesn't cut it. For me, that sounds like irresponsible, funny money economics. But you Conservative MPs seem to be falling into the same trap of just calling for the government to dole out more money, which is not quite what you'd expect from the Conservative Party. So maybe the Labour Party will get away with it.
I think that calling for a reduction in a VAT is viewed in a different way. That was something that was meant to have been a Brexit dividend, that we would be in charge of our taxes. It's something we could possibly do to help the consumer. So I think that will be looked upon favourably, and also looking at those sort of green levies on the bills more than any other country.
It's a terrible idea. Cutting VAT on energy bills is a really bad policy. It's bad for the climate, and it's bad for social justice, because it means people with big houses get a bigger tax reduction. So that's a terrible idea, and I'm disappointed that the Labour Party's been backing it. Plus, where is the money coming from? I mean, just because the government has borrowed £400 billion that it didn't have doesn't mean it can just go on borrowing even more. We have to balance the books at some point.
And they might look at a windfall tax on some of the oil coming in from the sort of North Sea. So I think there will be different ways to look at it. But I think what they're saying is we know what's coming forward. There is going to be, cost of living increases there. How do we support things using the levers that we've got? And Conservatives would say, obviously, we wouldn't be looking for increases in taxes. Could we use that? But who do you see as people coming forward? What other predictions? Who do you see that might be the stars in 2022?
Well, you, Esther, obviously.
Oh, no, come on.
No, I think it's going to be a very important year for Rachel Reeves as Shadow Chancellor. she's got to prove herself against Rishi Sunak, who is still the most popular politician in Britain, although he will face some incredible challenges this coming year, precisely because of those tax rises that are coming up and the cost of living pressures. But the question is whether Rachel Reeves can establish herself as a credible alternative, or just carp from the opposition and offer free money. I mean, I think that is the real clash to watch over the coming year, is Rachel Reeves versus Rishi Sunak.
And of course, you know, names that we learnt over 2020 and 2021, whether it was Valance or Whitty, all of these names, are there new names that we think we might hear? I've written one down there, Jonathan Brearley, Chief Executive of Ofgem. Do you think there will be a new set of names by the end of 2022 that we'll all know?
Well, possibly, but Professor Sir Chris Whitty is probably going to continue to be quite important, and Patrick Vallance. I mean, I'm afraid, you know, coronavirus isn't going to go away, although I think, the idea of learning to live with it is going to move to a new phase fairly soon. I certainly hope so. But I mean, I remember predicting this time last year that 2021 would be the year we saw the back of arguments about Brexit, and we saw the back of coronavirus restrictions. So that turned out to be no good at all. Because I think turning to Brexit in the coming year, I think the most important political story for Boris Johnson could well be the continuing problem of small boats crossing the Channel, because that makes a mockery of the promise to take back control of our borders. And it suggests that having done Brexit, he hasn't actually succeeded in the most important, well, for a lot of people, one of the most important parts of that, which is giving us back our control of immigration policy.
And I can't disagree with you there, John. Do you think things could get easier after the elections in France? Do you think then we might be able to do a deal there? People are talking about that now, that actually it's the elections that's prevented us doing a deal with sort of the immigration crossings. Do you think so?
No, I think that's a happy Tory fantasy. And also, I mean, those elections aren't until April. I mean, and if there's mild, calm weather, there will be large numbers of people coming across before then. And I think that is going to cause the Conservative Party some considerable difficulty, because Priti Patel has been quite unable to get a grip on the situation. Not her fault particularly, because it is an impossible problem to deal with. I mean, the problem is that people know that once they've taken those terrible risks crossing the Channel, they're most unlikely to be deported. Once they get here, they are most likely to be able to stay, and that is what's driving the traffic. And there's no real agreement we can reach with the French that would be able to curtail that, unless the French give us control of all their beaches over a 100-mile stretch, so that we, or at least our police and presumably military, could police all those beaches. And even then, I'm not sure that would work. But that's not going to happen anyway, whether Emmanuel Macron has been re-elected or not.
And the offshore processing centres, do you think we'll get that through Parliament? Do you think there will be agreement there, so we're not dependent on France? It's something that we ourselves will be able to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a possibility, but we still haven't identified an offshore place. We haven't identified another country where these centres could be set up. So, I mean, I suspect what the government may end up doing is detaining new arrivals in the UK somewhere, which is going to be a huge undertaking and of questionable legality, and it's going to cause all sorts of problems with international treaties, the European Convention on Human Rights, the 1951 Refugee Convention. Those are going to be called into question, and there's no way that I would have thought that Parliament is going to agree to repudiate those kind of international agreements. And I think that is where Boris Johnson is going to end up in real difficulty.
John, you said predictions were a fool's game. You did predictions last year. Did you get any right? You told us some of the ones you didn't get right. Did you get any right from last year?
Yeah, no, I did quite well last year, but that's because I was cheating and only doing really tame, cautious predictions. Like I suggested that Gavin Williamson might be moved from the education department. I mean, that was a really cowardly prediction. And I suggested that Sajid Javid might come back into the cabinet. So yeah, and Sadiq Khan, I said he would win re-election in London. I suggested the SNP would win the Scottish Parliament elections. That wasn't difficult. I mean, what I failed to predict was that the SNP would actually fail to win an overall majority, which was the really significant development there. But for the coming year, I'm going to be cowardly again and suggest that all the main parties will keep their existing leaders, including Boris Johnson.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us today, and I will speak to you soon, no doubt, John. Thank you very much.
Last year, children got ready to go back to school and then stayed stuck at home, learning online. The government is determined to keep kids in school this year, given the huge damage done during the pandemic. To discuss this, I'm joined by Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee and Conservative MP for Harlow. Robert, Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
There is going to be disruption if teachers get infected. Nobody wants it. It's just inevitable. The government are trying their best to mitigate that. Mask wearing in schools seems like a pretty small thing to do in order to keep kids in class.
Well, first thing I'd say, and it's important to do this, I give heartfelt thanks to all the teachers and support staff, not just in my constituency of Harlow, but also around the country, are doing everything possible to keep schools open, keep our children learning. Of course, things are very difficult. The one difference we have between now and last year is that most teachers and support staff will have been vaccinated. Many of them will have had the booster programme. Many children over the age of 12 have been vaccinated as well. So that gives staff and children more protection against the coronavirus. The government have put carbon monoxide pills in 99% of schools, which will measure ventilation and explain what is needed, what schools need. £100 million of funding has also been given to schools. There'll always be a need for more funding. I always campaign for more funding, but the government are doing what they can. And I support what the Secretary of State is trying to do in terms of keeping the schools open, even though I have reservations about children wearing masks.
The government have been accused of doing less well on the issue of air purifiers. They've announced that they'll provide 7,000 air purifiers in schools to increase ventilation. Number one, it's very last minute. And number two, there are 300,000 classrooms in England. It seems wholly inadequate.
Well, some schools, first of all, it's good that those 7,000 ventilation systems are going to schools. There's another 1,000 going to special needs schools and alternative schools, alternative provision schools. And what the Secretary of State has said is that they've supplied carbon dioxide machines to every school. They measure the ventilation system. If the ventilation systems aren't adequate, then they will give more ventilation to schools. What I'd like to see for the government, and I've called for this, is for them to have a database of almost every school in the country, in the heart of the Department for Education, where there are problems. If teachers are away because of COVID, the government sets up a task force for those individual schools where they help them with the equipment they need, but also with supply teachers, because the key problem isn't just issues like ventilation, which is important, but also making sure that these schools have the teachers and support staff they need, and whether or not they may be able to either merge classrooms or share classrooms with nearby schools. I appreciate this causes enormous strain on teachers and support staff and the children. And it's not perfect, and it may not be able to be done everywhere, but it can be done in some places. And whatever happens, we've got to try and keep as many schools as possible open and keep our children learning.
The Labour Party say that if the government had prioritised the vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds over Christmas, that would have ensured that schools were more likely to remain open.
Well, the vaccine programme for children...
Oh, We're going to get Robert. Robert, sorry, we lost you for a second. So, yes, I was just putting to you the point that Labour have made that 12 to 15-year-olds should have been prioritised for vaccines over the Christmas period.
Well, the vaccine programme has been going on for children since well before Christmas. There was an issue because, of course, the JCVI expressed reservations, but then the Chief Medical Officer came out in favour of them. And of course, that took a bit of time, and it always takes these things time to implement. But we have a significant number. I think it's over 50% of over 12s who've now been vaccinated. Nothing is perfect. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're dealing with a variant. I'm not saying everything the government has done is right. I've called for the task force. I absolutely support the need for more funding. I want more support for supply teachers. I wish they'd done the volunteer army much earlier. I called for it over a year ago. But nevertheless, I think Nadhim Zahawi is taking every measure possible to try and keep our children learning in school. And that has to be the priority, because we've done enormous damage to children during lockdown in terms of their mental health, their educational attainment, and their life chances.
Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
I'm Neil Oliver. You can join me live every Saturday evening for opinions and discussions about the week's top stories. There's also a smattering of history and archaeology and features that define our great British Isles. You'll hear my thoughts unfiltered, as well as those of my guests, and we don't always agree. And we want to hear from you too. Neil Oliver Live, Saturdays from 7 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Over 500,000 people have signed a petition to strip former Prime Minister Tony Blair of his title, a title personally bestowed by the Queen. Sir Tony, as he would now like to be known, was made a Knight Companion of the Most Noble Order of the Garter in the New Year's Honours. It's the world's oldest national order of knighthood and the pinnacle of the British honours system. Well, let's talk about this petition now. Let's talk about the public reaction to this honour. I'm joined now in the studio by Andrew Pearce, journalist and consultant editor of the Daily Mail. Welcome to the programme, Andrew. This poll, was this to be expected? We know that Tony Blair is someone who divides opinion.
Yeah. Look, this is the oldest order of chivalry in the unwritten British Constitution. And if he had any chivalry about him, he'd have said to Her Majesty, thank you very much, but I'm not accepting it, because she has been caught in the flack, because it is a deeply, deeply unpopular honour which she's decided to give to him. She's drawing to the end of her reign. We know that. He was Prime Minister 14 years ago. He did some good things. I'm the first to admit it. He brought a peace in Northern Ireland, independence of the Bank of England. But I'm afraid the whole rocks of his premiership are stranded on the Iraq war. It was an illegal war, in my view. 179 British service personnel died in that war. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, civilians. The whole Middle East instability is as a result of that war. And let's not forget, Tom, what the Chilcot report said into that war. That was 2.6 million words. I didn't read all of them, but I read again the summary by Sir John Chilcot, and it said that Tony Blair had not exhausted the options for peace before he went into war with George Bush. He also said he'd exaggerated the case that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. We also know about the death of Dr. David Kelly, the unfortunate weapons inspector, who was the source of a BBC briefing where he said the dossier which Blair had used to persuade the Commons to vote for war had been sexed up. These are huge scars, I'm afraid, on Blair's premiership. And let's not also forget, just a few weeks ago, we had the madness of the flight from Kabul. We withdrew our last remaining British personnel there. What do you think the families make, Tom, of the 474 people who died in Afghanistan? Do they not think that whole war was in vain? The Taliban are now back in charge, so did their loved ones lose their lives in vain? And let's not forget, too, hundreds more suffering life-saving injuries. That's why I'm afraid Tony Blair should not be given a knighthood.
I think that you make a very compelling point about the folly of the Iraq war, indeed how it diverted crucial resources away from Afghanistan. Perhaps that would have been a greater success if we hadn't gone into Iraq. However, there are lots of other people who've made mistakes in their time who have ascended to become a Knight of the Garter. And, of course, Tony Blair was Prime Minister for a decade, longer than just about most of his compatriots. And if we look at some of the other Prime Ministers who've received this honour, John Major, not considered to be sort of the most successful Prime Minister in the world. Margaret Thatcher, of course, someone who divided...
The best Prime Minister.
I might agree with you there, but certainly there'd be lots of people, if there had been an e-petition site in the 1990s, perhaps she would have had 500,000
But she didn't get a knighthood.
Too.
She didn't get a knighthood or a damehood. She went into the House of Lords.
She got exactly the same honour, this companion of the Garter.
Yeah, she did.
Callaghan, Heath, Wilson, Eden, Attlee, Churchill, Baldwin, Asquith, Balfour. It seems to be pretty regular.
But none of I agree. And the exception in there is Harold Macmillan, an old Etonian who rejected it twice. And Blair of course, was the great moderniser. Blair was the one who wanted to reform the House of Lords completely, get rid of all the hereditary principles, and yet he takes one of the most old-fashioned honours of them all. It doesn't sit with his modernising stance, does it? But the difference is with all those Prime Ministers, Tom, none of them took us into that war where we think the House of Commons was misled, that Privy Councillors were misled. And, of course, we saw in the Chilcot report the letter he wrote to George Bush in the summer of 2002, I'm with you all the way, Mr. President. He'd made his mind up even before the case had been properly argued. And I'm afraid the chaos in the Middle East now, the terror attacks we've had in Europe, I think all flow from that war.
Well, there's Eden, of course, who was not considered to be a very successful Prime Minister.
But he made a terrible mess
in Suez.
He did.
And of course, Callaghan, and you had the Winter of Discontent, and arguably, Attlee, of course, plunged the country into a form of socialism from which we did not recover for half a century. Yet these people all got honours.
Yeah. But I just don't think just because they did, we should then Tony Blair should too. All wrongs don't make a right. And times have changed now. I think what's been going on here, the Queen's reign is coming to an end, not too soon, we hope. I think she's probably been tidying up affairs and thinks Blair was Prime Minister for 14 years. She had a difficult relationship, we know that, with him because of, he was probably the first Prime Minister who cancelled the weekly audience. He would do it on his terms when he wanted to. But I think this has drawn her into controversy that she doesn't need at the end of her reign. 500,000 signatures today, Tom. By the end of the week, we'll be above 1 million because this is such a divisive move. And why does Blair need it? He's got millions. We didn't even talk about the millions he's made from advising dodgy despots around the world and his huge property empire. He's a fantastically rich former Prime Minister, the richest of any former Prime Ministers. Why does he need this award? He frankly doesn't. And if he had a shred of decency, he'd say, thank you, I thought about it. I don't need to be called Sir Tony.
The story that dominated the back end of last year, and that was, of course, that 28,000 migrants managed to cross the English Channel into Britain last year. That was 3 times as many as the year before. But ministers have been warned that unless the government changes its policy, more arrivals and more drownings will happen again this year. A Home Office minister said the government is reforming its approach to asylum through its new plan for immigration. But will this be enough? Well, delighted to say our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, is live for us in Dover. And Mark, it may only be, the 4th of January, but we're already starting to see dozens of migrants arriving where you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to think, as you say, just 4 days into the new year, and the criminal gangs have taken advantage of a tiny weather window, really, because we've had appalling conditions for really 10 days or more now in the Channel that's prevented any of these small boats from being able to get into the water and across into UK territorial waters. However, there is a window at the moment where the number of or at least the weather out there in terms of the wind speeds have dropped to a point where they could just about get into the water. A few tried actually overnight and last night, and they just didn't make it off the shore, off the beaches of northwestern France, but some did. Now, we believe at least 4 small boats made it across. We are told at least 70 migrants. That's we've counted more than 70 in at Dover. Some suggestions that some other migrants may have gone perhaps to Ramsgate, although we've not got that confirmed as yet. But certainly, as I say, significant that here we are, just 4 days in, and this first lots of migrants arriving here off the Dover lifeboat, initially at 10:30 this morning, and then about an hour ago, the Border Force vessel, a catamaran Hurricane, came in to Dover Harbour, offloading more in the way of migrants, Darren.
And Mark, suggestions about trying to at least manage this much better, or that it can only be done with a deal with France, and yet that seems to be off the cards, we're told, until at least after the French election, which is not until April.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to see how the government can really get a proper handle on this. Yes, they're tightening up issues around asylum applications, the length of time it can take. If you come across on an irregular route, such as across the English Channel in a small boat or in the back of a lorry, you go to the back of the queue, even though you may be a bona fide refugee in that sense. You're right to the back of the queue according to the government. This is what will be within that Immigration and Borders Bill when it finally comes into law. But really, you, as you indicated there, need the cooperation, wholehearted cooperation of the French to stop these boats leaving their beaches in the first place. Now, I'm told from sources on the French side of the Channel that there was some efforts by the police there to try and stop them leaving from beaches of Dunkirk, and that there was some skirmishes with migrants while trying to do that last night. It didn't stop, of course, at least 4 boats getting into the water anyway and making it to the UK.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Over the last few months, gas prices have been spiralling. 24 energy providers have collapsed, and there's little good news on the horizon. Well, now a group of Conservative MPs are demanding the Prime Minister take swift action to lower costs for families and businesses by both ditching VAT on energy bills and scrapping green levies. Of course, the Labour Party has also called for VAT on fuel bills to be scrapped, albeit temporarily. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by one of those MPs leading the charge for cheaper energy bills. Lee Anderson is the Conservative MP for Ashfield, and welcome to the programme. So first of all, these two twin measures, getting rid of the green subsidies and abolishing VAT on energy bills, how much money would that actually save a consumer?
Well, you've got to realise, Tom, this is, we've got this situation. It's not happened overnight. It's happened over many years, COVID aside. And it's not a quick fix. This is a short-term measure, if you like. That's what I think, anyway, to help people immediately to overcome their gas bills. Now, I would say it's up to it depends how much fuel you use, I suppose, in a year. But any saving is a saving for the people of Ashfield. I'm speaking to them on a daily basis who tell me now that that their gas companies have changed. This is because of the price cap. They've changed. They started with British Gas. They've gone to a smaller company. And then, hey, presto, 6 months later, a year later, they end up back with British Gas again, and the bills have gone up. So that's not a good position that we're in. But like I say, the environmental levy, if you like, and the VAT will make a decent saving. But then we've got to decide on what we do as a party, as a government, to make sure that fuel, domestic fuel, is more affordable in the future. And that's the real problem we face.
Would you agree with your colleague John Redwood's call this morning to start exploring our own natural gas resources in the UK? Of course, the EU has just declared natural gas as somewhat of a green fuel. They'll be importing it from Russia, but we do have big reserves under our country. Would you support hydraulic fracturing to get that gas out and lower bills potentially in the medium term?
Yes, I would, Tom. I mean, I come from a red wall seat. We're what I class as like dirty towns, really. We're brought up on coal mining, big industry, and we have this in our DNA. And, you know, you look over the pond in the US, they're fracking, their shale gas is a fraction of the cost for domestic users as what gas is in this country. We're importing gas from Norway, from around the world, or from around Europe, should I say, and it's costing us an absolute fortune. Look, you know, we've closed all our coal mines, we're reluctant to frack, we're reluctant to get oil out the North Sea, and guess what's happened? It's not rocket science. Our gas prices are going up, and we are now a hostage to other countries who are supplying our energy. It's absolute madness.
Now, Russia has clearly exacerbated this energy crisis in Europe in particular, putting pressure on Germany and others to try and approve this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. To what extent is a lot of this out of our control as a country, if we're really at the beck and call of these global forces, and particularly as at the beck and call as to whether Mr. Putin likes us very much?
Well, you're right, Tom. It is out of our control. But what is in our control is domestic production. You know, I see no reason now. You know, the pandemic, we're coming out of the pandemic. It's brought it to our attention more. And people are going to notice more and be more vocal once they get their next bills in February, March time, once they're seeing extra cash on there. So now we have to have the debate. Shall we explore, like you said, fracking, extra oil production, make sure that we have to be self-sufficient in this country. And I think in the past, what we've done is we've put the cart before the horse. Like I say, shut all our pits. We've stopped, we're slowing down oil production. We're very reluctant, whilst we're on this green journey, to explore fossil fuels more in this country. And as a result of that, the poorer people in my community are going to be paying through the nose, and that's unacceptable.
Now, of course, we did host COP26 in Glasgow in November. There was an agreement that was reached by the whole world. There are many measures within that agreement, and generally, the British public, according to most polls, seem to be relatively supportive of trying to reach net zero by 2050. They think it's an admirable goal, and certainly the Prime Minister seems to think that as well. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I think it's admirable. And, you know, I've done some polling in my own constituency. And when you ask people the question, 95% of people agree with what government's trying to achieve. But what they don't agree with, Tom, is how we're doing it. You know, whilst we're transitioning, we should be sensible. You know, fossil fuels, nobody wants to use fossil fuels, but they should be seen now as a necessary evil while we transition over the next 30, 40, 50 years, however long it's going to take. So let's use them. Let's get them out of the ground in this country. Let's use them while we're transitioning, and hopefully we can have a sensible energy policy where people can actually afford to heat their homes.
Interesting point there. I wonder, just finally, how receptive do you think the government is to this push? Obviously, a number of former ministers are behind this campaign as well, Red Wall MPs like yourself. Is the government listening?
I hope so, Tom. I mean, I've done a little bit of polling this morning on one of my private social media groups, and 90% of the people are saying that they would agree to fracking and fossil fuels in the short term whilst we transition to bring energy bills down. Now, it's all right for MPs like me. I'm earning 80-odd grand. That's a little bit less than what you're earning a year, Tom. I can afford to pay my gas bill and my electric bill. You know, I get my transport paid to and from London every week, so I'm comfortable. But I've been that person in Nashfield who's been on minimum wage with a couple of kids on my own and had that prepayment meter. And I know what it's like to put a $5's worth of gas in on a Sunday night and be watching that meter all week long.
Well, Lee Anderson, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Just one thing, Tom, before you go.
Important point. Yes.
Just one thing before you go. Fasten your button up, young man, and put a tie on.
Oh, you know what? My boss will absolutely love you for saying that. Absolutely. Well, Lee Anderson, we always appreciate your straight talking here.
It's a year since rioters stormed the Capitol building in protest at the American election result. President Biden has not united the country, and some fear civil war could eventually break out. Well, someone who knows America very well indeed is Sunday Times columnist and former deputy editor Sarah Baxter. Sarah, you wrote quite an alarming piece yesterday suggesting some now believe that the states could slide into civil war. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and how you came to that conclusion?
Yes, well, if you remember a year ago, there was extraordinary scenes of violence at the Capitol. Some were even carrying the flag of the South, the secessionist flag of Dixie, and but everybody thought that this was, or everybody seemed to think this was a sort of really weird incident that would finish off Donald Trump, that he would be very isolated after that. But in a peculiar way, his strength has grown by refusing to accept that he lost the election, despite overwhelming evidence that he did. He has managed to persuade his base that he is exactly what they always loved him for, a fighter. And he's managed to sort of cuff himself up and sort of come back and actually persuade about over 70% of Republican voters that the election was indeed stolen. And there's even been a poll just yesterday around the same time as my own article came out. It came out in the Washington Post saying that about 40% of Republicans and independent voters thought that violence could be justified. And this is an extraordinary situation 12 months on. Now, I live in a corner of Pennsylvania, which is quite heavily pro-Trump. And people say to me all the time things, sometimes they say it nonchalantly, sometimes, with a sort of almost eager anticipation that there's going to be civil war in this country in the next 10 years or so. And I look at them and I say, really? And they say, yes. And sometimes I think it's because they're armed to the teeth and there's something that means they quite like to use those weapons. And at other times I just think, actually, the divisions are so profound now between, blue democratic America and red Republican America, between urban America and rural America. And there's so much now surrounding whether or not Joe Biden is president of all America that the dividing lines are getting really entrenched. And it is pretty scary.
I read those polls as well, and that divide, more than a third, nearly 40% of Americans said that they would, use violence against their own government. And as you said, it was concerning because it had increased from just sort of 10% who would have done that in the 1990s. So there has been a movement forward. So what I'd like to know, and what are you hearing on the ground, 6th of January will be the anniversary of Capitol Hill. Is that going to be a flashpoint? What's going to happen on that day?
Well, Donald Trump is going to sort of troll the half of America that didn't vote for him by holding a press conference on that day at his resort in Florida at Mar-a-Lago, basically undoubtedly repeating his claims that the election was stolen, even though he's never actually managed to produce evidence to that effect at all in court or elsewhere. And so he's going to, but it doesn't matter. As I said, he's seen as a fighter. People like the fact that he refuses to accept that he might have lost. And so he's going to rub people's noses in the fact that he's still around. And in contrast, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, very much a hated figure among Trump supporters, is going to hold her own day of sort of prayerfulness, unity and patriotism. And that, in a sense, is itself a dig at the other side, far from being about unity, because, of course, it's the Trump supporters who claim they were the supposed true patriots on that day when they stormed the Capitol. So she's now trying to reclaim the word, but it's always a bad sign, I'm afraid, Esther, when people can't agree on who are the patriots. And the militias used to be a sort of oddball, group. It was, America always had extremists, but as you say, at most it was sort of 10% of the population. But helped by accelerants like social media, the situation has really got to quite an alarming divide now.
And you're right, Trump hasn't gone away. Some might even say he's becoming more popular and he's going to have his own sort of social media platform. But there is the midterm elections coming. What is going to happen there? Predictions for Trump, the Republican Party?
Well, I think the Republican Party will probably do very well unless there's a remarkable turnaround, because ever since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the failure to contain COVID, and the inflationary pressures on the American economy, Joe Biden's been in a lot of trouble. And he's not seen as particularly effective. The truth is, he was never seen as likely to be particularly effective, but he was seen as the anti-Trump candidate. But in the midterm elections, where The presidency is not on the ballot, but control of the Houses of Congress, I think the Republicans will do very well. And Trump will take that as a signal that all is forgiven for January 6th. And he wants to come storming back, get revenge, and win another time.
Now, in the Times today, it says hard left Democrats are plotting to unseat, as they see it, their failing Biden. So they're saying the new sort of left-wing Democrats, whether that's the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are sort of coming forward, wanting to oust him. Is that going to happen?
Well, I don't think that a progressive candidate will necessarily win. They've had a series of disastrous slogans like defund the police, which every major city which had a spike in crime as a result had to backpedal. The progressives have not had a good year, but what they think is that Joe Biden's going to be too old to stand at the next election. He's already, almost 80. He's going to be 82 at the time of the next inauguration if he wins. And I think they want to make sure they've got a candidate on the ballot who can represent their views. I don't think America is feeling very much like having a progressive candidate at the moment. In fact, a lot of people say it's the progressives who helped to torpedo Joe Biden's Build Back Better bills and helped to have a disaster recently in the Virginia governorship election.
So challengers might want Biden to go, but Biden himself, is he planning to remain in post? I mean, will it be a rerun of the last American election?
I think Joe Biden very much intends to remain in post, no matter what people say about his abilities at this stage. Just remember, he tried and tried to become president for so long. He's waited for this, to become president for half a century. He's not about to chuck it in now. I think he would love to serve 2 terms. And in fact, he's pretty much said so now. And the fact that Kamala Harris has been underperforming as his vice president pretty much clears the route for him to stand again if he wants to. But of course, if he looks like he's going to lose and lose badly, it may be, people have told me it'll be up to his wife, Jill, to tell him enough, time to go, Joe.
And, as we look at the year ahead, people have been given predictions, what's going to happen in 2022. We see big geopolitical shifts. We see people concerned about the new sort of ever-expanding China. We see, as it might be, America weakened. How do you see these shifts and moves globally?
Well, one of the very damaging things about the very hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan is that it did weaken America geopolitically and emboldened its enemies because it was seen that America didn't want any more adventures abroad. So very recently, Joe Biden has been talking tough about Russian maneuvers on the borders of Ukraine, saying that he's just been on the phone yesterday with the Ukrainian president saying that we're going to stand by you. And he's been delivering similar messages to Taiwan, where China seems very much on maneuvers, having subdued Hong Kong pretty effectively lately. But does anyone believe him? Is he ready for the sort of toughness that might be required against very formidable adversaries? He can talk tough and he can talk about further sanctions and punitive measures or trade measures, etc., etc. But he's definitely, his credibility's definitely been weakened by the events in Afghanistan, no doubt.
And again, talking about China, we've got, again, world news here in the Times. China's bullying is a warning to Europe, claim the Lithuanians. They're concerned about this, China moving, expanding into other countries across the globe.
Yeah, well, China has an extremely active diplomatic as well as military wing, which is basically all about money, economy, deals, helping countries with debt, etc. And then, of course, China acts like it owns these countries. So the bill that comes in later turns out to be pretty heavy. Lithuania, of course, has a long experience of having Russia on its border and is very alarmed there by Putin's. Putin seems incredibly emboldened recently, and that's a worry for them.
And finally, Sarah, have you got any predictions for 2022 that you'd like to leave with us?
Well, I do think that it's going to be a difficult year for the Democrats. I do think the Republicans have got every chance of coming back and holding the majority in Congress, which, particularly in the Senate, which is 50-50 at the moment. And if they do that, it's very difficult for the Democrats to pass anything. And at that point, I think you'll see Donald Trump talking more openly about standing again in 2024. But, a lot of Republicans think he'd be far better off as a kingmaker, that they could really trounce Biden if they backed somebody who said nice things about Trump, but wasn't actually Trump, because Trump still remains a divisive figure and someone who could really turn out otherwise disaffected Democrats to vote against him.
He didn't have those two terms, did he? I think, he might want to come back to prove a point. So he might want to be a kingmaker, but at the end of the day, I'm quite sure he'd sooner be the king. Sarah, thank you.
Right.
You totally think I'm totally right. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully speak to you again soon.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 3 o'clock. UK experts say a fourth COVID jab is not yet needed as boosters are 90% effective in people over 65 after 3 months. Meanwhile, a group of MPs, leading medics and scientists is calling for a review of the jab's benefits for 12 to 15-year-olds. Conservative MP Miriam Cates, who coordinated this campaign, told GB News the benefits should be reassessed in light of the Omicron variant.
Over recent weeks, with the Omicron variant becoming dominant and also with some new studies about the risks, I wonder if that balance has actually shifted. So it's possible now that vaccination doesn't really reduce the risk of transmission. Of course, it still provides excellent protection against severe disease. So it's brilliant for people who are at risk from COVID. But if it doesn't protect against transmission, that reduces the benefits of vaccinating children. And if we know a bit more about the potential harms, then we need to look at those too.
Court documents show Novak Djokovic, who's fighting deportation from Australia, tested positive for coronavirus last month. His lawyers claim he was granted a vaccine exemption to enter the country because of the recent infection. The tennis star has been detained at an immigration facility in Melbourne since Thursday morning after his visa was cancelled. Czech tennis player Renata Vorokova left Australia today after similar visa issues. Thousands of flat owners will not have to pay to remove dangerous cladding from their buildings. Housing Secretary Michael Gove says developers will have to cover the costs of the cladding changes for buildings over 11 metres tall. The bill's estimated to be up to £4 billion. Business commentator Michael Wilson says it's a relief for leaseholders.
For those people who have been trapped through no fault of their own, because, people may well have bought flats. What do they know about cladding? Or rather, what did they know about cladding before Grenfell? Probably very little. Why should they know? It's down to safety organisations, of which there are plenty in this country, etc., etc. So I think it's relatively good news. How it will be applied, the detail of that to come.
At least 56 people have been killed and 30 wounded after an airstrike in Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray. Aid workers say the bombing hit a camp for the internally displaced on Friday night. The government has previously denied targeting civilians in the 14-month conflict with rebellious Tigrayan forces. The family of trailblazing actor Sir Sidney Poitier says his death has left a giant hole in our hearts. The first black man to win a Best Actor Oscar has died, aged 94. Among his films were In the Heat of the Night and To Sir with Love. It's 4 minutes past 3. We'll be back with the latest news in an hour.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery in the west, but